Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to a video that is a bit of a first in a few different respects. It's the first time I have ever reviewed a micro rotor watch. Not the first time I've handled one, but the first time I have ever properly reviewed one. They are such a rarity, especially at an affordable price point. I'm really looking forward to getting into this one, especially under the macro lens. And this one is none other than a Baltic MR001. Which is the first Baltic that I have looked at on the channel in exactly 5 years. I reviewed their HMS001 back in the middle of 2018, a gorgeous little watch, but I felt it had the wrong movement in it. It should have been a Miyota 9000 or a manual winder and not a Miyota 8000. Now the brand has come on leaps and bounds since that very first offering, establishing itself as a major player in the micro scene, especially when it comes to this retro style. Now you saw the pop-up? This video is sponsored by Baltic. They got in touch with me late last year about reviewing this watch, but they sell out pretty quickly and the last consignment of them all sold out before they could send me one. They just got a fresh restock, however, and sent a salmon dialed one in for review. I will of course therefore leave links in the description of the video to the Baltic website. So let's twist it around today, literally and figuratively. Let's not just flip the camera, let's also flip the watch and start with some footage not of the dial, but of the movement. Let's get on with it. It really isn't often that I start a review by looking at the back of the watch, but I think you can understand why we're doing that today. I did say in the intro that I have handled micro rotor watches before, and I have, but the last one I handled was a $50,000 Chopard. These Baltics are €545, which is a little more manageable for most people. And I don't think it looks half bad. Now this is a Chinese-made Hangzhou caliber 5000A. Definitely not the first Hangzhou I've featured on the channel. I've looked at several of their 6460 GMT movements, and I've been impressed with how they performed. Some Chinese movements though can look good from afar, but far from good. The closer you get into the decoration, the rougher it looks. But this looks really quite good considering the modest price. As you can see here, it has 33 joules, beats 28,800 times per hour, and has been regulated to 5 positions. Packaging is perfectly pleasant, black cardboard outer box with an unusual cork inner box. Did you know that most of the world's natural cork comes from Portugal? Well, you do now. Inside the cork box, the watch sits on a cushion, all pretty standard stuff, but all in keeping with the price tag. The watch is also supplied with a small instruction manual with a little bit about Baltic's owners and the movement in the MR001. It also comes with a very nice metal warranty card. Very important today, I think, for peace of mind. As such, I was delighted to see it's a full 2-year warranty. The big advantage of a micro rotor is that the rotor sits within the movement rather than on the back of the movement, meaning it's slimmer than it would otherwise be with a traditional movement. Therefore, brands can use high dome crystals without the penalty that is normally incurred by them. The overall thickness of the watch is not affected because the movement itself is slimmer. Which brings me neatly onto dimensions and specifications. This is not a big watch. Baltic don't make big watches, they make retro watches, and retro watches tend to be smaller. This one is 36mm in diameter and 10.2mm thick. That's the benefit of using a micro rotor movement. Lug to lug is a super compact 44mm, but it does still have 20mm lug width. Water resistance is nominal at 30 meters from a push-pull crown. Crystal is a top hat Hesselite, and on the supplied leather strap, this is a slip of a thing weighing in at a mere 48 grams. Case finish is simple but nicely executed. It's a 3-piece case. The midsection has a horizontal brush, and you can see that the lugs are drilled for easy strap changes. There's a small high-polished right-angled fixed bezel on top of that with the Hesselite set inboard. Very much inboard, as you'll see. It's a 5.6mm unsigned crown. I'll kind of let them off with that though, because this is very much trying to look like a watch from the 1950s when signed crowns weren't really a thing. And that's it. It's pretty simple. The mid case is quite flat, but the lugs do point down. To be honest though, the lug to lug is so short that it doesn't really matter much at all. The supplied strap is nice, it really suits the watch. The blue goes with the dial, and the stitching is a brighter shade of blue to give it a bit of a lift. It's soft, it's Italian calf grain, and it tapers from 20 all the way down to 15. Now Baltic have doubled up here because in addition to the drilled lugs, this strap has quick release spring bars, 2 retainers, and there's a brushed buckle and tang with the Baltic branding etched into it in block capitals. It's quite a thin strap, but it's quite a delicate watch. I think it would be all too easy to add something too big, too bulky, and overpower the watch head, so do be careful if you're mixing and matching straps at home. Well, we've had a look at the back, let's have a look at the front. Again, super retro looks centered on a pair of high polished silver leaf hands and those applied high polished silver numerals. Depending on how this one catches the light, the numerals really pop. They're beautifully stylized and italicized breguets, and thankfully Baltic haven't truncated any to fit in the small second complication at the 7, they've just removed the 7 and the 8 entirely. The dial surface features a fairly subtle granular texture, and there is about as little branding on this one as can actually be put on a watch and still consider it to be branded. Just the Baltic brand name in block capitals above the pinion, and that is it. The small second subdial has concentric circles and is graded to every minute, but doesn't feature any numerals to keep everything nice and simple. There are, however, numerals on a circular brush chapter ring at the edge of the dial, but they're pretty small because they're on the dial of a pretty small watch. It's a very pretty small watch though, and the high beat sweep on that tiny second hand means you barely know this one is moving at all. It's a very soothing effect. If you're not into this salmon colour, then 2 others are available. Blue would probably be the most legible, and silver probably the least legible, but that's not really what this one is designed for in the first place, is it? Alright, let's get it on wrist, starting by looking down the wrist. I've already described this as a slip of a thing, sub 50 gram, 44mm lug to lug, just over 10mm thick. If you get the right fit with the strap, you pretty much forget that you have this one on. And if you switch it for a pearl on, for example, the watch may well disappear entirely. That is until you roll your wrist and the light hits off those numerals. It's a really nice effect. And acrylic crystals may need a bit of maintenance and upkeep, buffing out scratches every so often, but they are perfectly suited to this style of watch. Sapphire or mineral just wouldn't have looked quite as rich, it just wouldn't have looked quite the same. The step bezel definitely encroaches on dial space though. There are big looking 36mm watches and small looking 36mm watches. This is definitely one of the latter. But the compact dimensions and subtle colour palette will definitely give this one a bit of unisex appeal as well, I'm sure. But I know plenty of guys like this size and shape, me included, and when you see it from the pocket shot, it really doesn't look too small at all. Alright, moans and niggles, and I'm going to start with a carryover complaint from the last Baltic that I reviewed and a couple of similar watches that I have reviewed since then. The top surface of the high polished bezel looks great when it's clean and shiny, but it's rarely either of those things. It's the first part of the watch to attract grub, dirt and dust and fingerprints, so I'd recommend, if you want to keep this thing looking at its best, daily polishes at a minimum. Plus that surface is going to be the first part of the watch to scuff and to scratch. And then there's the dial colour, salmon. Colour is very much up to individuals to interpret. Of course, everyone's rods and cones and eyes are different, but I've never seen a salmon this colour. It's probably more golden bronze than out and out salmon. There's nothing wrong with the colour, it's just less salmony than you might be expecting considering they call it salmon. And the movement is definitely pretty to look at and nicely finished. I mean, my macro lens takes no prisoners and this one comes through relatively unscathed, but it's a relatively new Chinese-made movement, so there are bound to be question marks about its long-term durability. It may claim to be regulated and feature an accuracy of plus to minus 20 seconds per day, but I put mine on the time grapher and it was running outside of that, a little fast at plus 28 seconds per day, so don't expect supreme levels of accuracy. I guess that's what I'm saying. A few other brands are using these now, and a Google troll didn't reveal any horror stories though, which is just as well. I think the 24-month warranty is the key to relaxing into this one rather than waiting for something to go wrong. You're covered if it does. And this is not a spec monster. It is very simple. It is very basic with a very deliberately archaic set of specs, including crystal that will scratch, water resistance that will have you rolling down your sleeve at the first sign of rain. Pretty dial, pretty movement, nice strap. That's your lot today. In fact, this is a new watch that feels a lot like you're wearing a vintage watch, and I guess in a nutshell, That's what Baltic are trying to offer here. You're almost getting a new old stock style watch, something like that anyway. It's so light on wrist that you barely know it's there, and you get that lovely rich warm character from the acrylic crystal, particularly in combination with those applied numerals. They only do these in small batches, and every time they seem to sell out every time they release a batch. Not for everyone, but I can definitely see why this brand has done so well since I last reviewed one. So there you have it, my first micro rotor watch, but hopefully not my last. My first Baltic in 5 years, but again, hopefully not my last. You don't get a lot of bells and whistles for your €550, but you get a very neat little watch with very little natural competition. And you get an all-important 24-month warranty on the movement. If you want to watch my original Baltic review from 2018, click here. Or if you're into retro loveliness and are okay with a Chinese movement, click here. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you again in a future video, I hope.